Sailing on the open sea, wind and waves, they set us free from islands.
Okay, we're back from Santiago. We got these screws. They're just a hair longer than I wanted. They're not exactly the style I wanted, but this is the best we're gonna find in this country for sure. The threads are as wide as I can fit through here, with the head just fitting flush inside here, so I definitely can't go any bigger of a screw. What I'm gonna do now, because I only had temporary screws in there before, I'm gonna re-pilot hole these. I can't find any tape to mark this, so I just twisted a piece of copper on there, and that's gonna be my stop. So I'm not gonna run that down until the copper digs in. That's just to gauge so that I stop when this copper wire here is flush with the top of the table here. I don't want to go all the way through, otherwise I'll be punching a hole right through the bottom of the table here.
Sunsets and stars overhead, peaceful waters we tread. Standing with our feet on shore, there's so much more. Colors bright and spirits high.
Alright. Gonna now repeat that a few times over. You don't need to watch that. Alright, so I was able to find some wood fill here, mahogany, closest match I can find in the Dominican Republic. And what I'm doing here, this is what was the bottom of the table. When the table now is closed, this will still be the bottom, but when it opens up, this will become the top. So we had our brackets here and our hinges were installed here. Now this is kind of mucky, so you're not going to see. I'll show you on the next one what I'm doing. But I'm just going to show a little trick on how to hide, at least somewhat hide. If you had a better match, it would definitely be better. But to hide the screw holes. So these were fairly large screw holes. One of them was actually a broken off screw in there, so I had to drill into the steel a bit. And what I did, I just took a knife and I cut kind of a diamond shape out of it where the hole was. So instead of just being a perfectly round hole, now it's just going to look kind of a long skinny diamond shape, which resembles a knot somewhat. Natural occurring thing in wood, natural defect. So what I'm doing here, I mean, this color looks awful, but once everything is sit and stained and re-yellowed to the sun, I'm gonna try to one hand this. So what I'm gonna do here is just take a knife or a blade, push in as deep as I can into these screw holes where those holes were. So these were perfectly round holes, and all I'm doing is trying to make them look a little more natural. Now, if I had a perfect colored wood fill here, it would definitely improve the situation, and I do think this will look a bit better once it's yellowed, because this teak tends to go a pretty red color once the varnish is exposed to the sun. You can even see when I add just a little bit of water to that, the color is looking a lot better. I'm just blending that in, trying to get it well into the wood. Because it's not a perfect circle now, resembles something a little bit more natural. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. There's both sides of this have hinge holes and bracket holes, and I'm also gonna do around, there's just a hairline around each one of these hinges. Unfortunately, a long story short, we went to Santiago to buy these screws, and we were laughing so hard when we left the store that I actually left my hinge, which we had to buy in St. Martin. I left the hinge on the counter of the store because we were laughing so hard when we left. The amount of paperwork involved in just buying 25 little screws for, you know, a few pesos. It was a lot of paperwork. It was order here, inspect here, pay for it here, collect here, sign out your paperwork here, get your paperwork inspected here, all for like just a few little screws. So we're laughing so hard when we left just because of the whole situation. Actually ended up leaving our hinge there, so a friend of ours now is on his way to Santiago to pick up that hinge for me so I can continue working. I realized the magic of YouTube. Seems like this was a couple minutes ago, but we've been waiting for about a week now.
In this life we find our sky, not life where the wind will lead.
Okay, we got all 4 hinges together in the same city now. Wonderful. I'm gonna put this together, gonna do a final sand on this, but before I do that, I want to have it totally assembled. Make sure everything's gonna line up and my rounded corners all line up with each other. Wow, that is our next step here.
Sails up the
Okay, and now it's all assembled and working perfectly. This is just what I wanted to check here. Make sure these rounded corners line up with each other, but I don't really see any point of sanding any of that. Yeah, maybe just a little bit right here. That's going to be about it. The rest of this is looking pretty good. A tiny bit of varnish still there I gotta clean off. As long as that's scuffed up really good anyways, the new coats will go on there. So it's ready for a final sanding coat now, and once it's final sanding I gotta be kind of delicate with it until I get that sealing coat on it. There's that slight warp on this. I think over time this will eventually, just from sitting in this position, gravity should take over and take that little bit of warp out of there. It's only about 3/16, so like just over 1/8 of an inch. Not too concerned about it. Okay, now that I got the basic random orbital, which is this, a random orbital sander, got most of that done to get any kind of heavy swirls out. I'm going to go over this now with a finish sander. This is also called like a jitterbug sander. It doesn't rotate, it does tiny little circles, so small that you can't really see them. It's only 3/64 or something like that. It's very tiny little circles. That takes the swirls out of any kind of wood. You might not have one quite as hefty as this. This is a Surf Prep, a professional sander from a cabinet shop, which I used to be a cabinet maker. Kept this from my old shop, pretty high-end sander. You might not have something like this. Just going finer and finer sandpaper on your orbital will do the same effect. I like this because it's not too aggressive. I can go around and clean up my edges because I want everything to be a little bit rounded, but I don't want to see any lines from the sander. This has a lot of cushioning to it. See, the pads are individually cushioned pads. So this is a sanding pad. It actually has foam in it, making it very soft. Yeah, so we're going to use next here. You just stick this on, and the great thing with this is I can get into the corners. So getting in here, the random orbital stops right here, but with this I can get right inside of those corners, reach areas that other sanders cannot. Alright, you might be wondering why I'm using this brass wire brush. On the bottom side of this table there was a lot of deep dark grain from this being just a really old table. This was the bottom side. Probably didn't have the best coat of varnish on it, so a little bit of mold gets inside of the deep grains, and I didn't want to re-varnish over top of that, leaving all these little dark spots. The wire brush did a pretty good job of digging bits out of there, and I'm just going to give this a good cleanup with the vacuum and get ready for painting. One thing I wanted to mention about working with teak, especially new pieces. This piece is new, this piece is old. This piece I picked up when we were in Trinidad. It is very oily. That's the reason why it works so well in the marine environment. Just sanding this or handling this bare piece of wood, you can literally feel like powdery moisturizer on your hand. Okay, so this is what we're using here. This is what's available in Dominican Republic. Just wood care, marine varnish. Chose this one particularly because it's flat or matte. I'm not a big fan of really glossy wood. The factory finish on this boat was in matte. Any touch-ups people have done over the years, they've added gloss, and now there's this gloss and matte mixture, which over time I'm going to redo back to the original matte finish. And we've been looking for a matte or flat varnish for a while, and I was actually quite surprised that we found it here in Dominican Republic, because many of the islands we've visited didn't have this finish. I'm going to be mixing in a fair amount of this yacht coating thinner, as well just good old-fashioned thinner. The first coat on these, I want to be very thin. I want that varnish to soak into the wood as much as possible. It's very hot here, and if you don't put enough thinner in it, it dries so fast that you just get really thick brush marks. So not only do I not want those brush marks, I want it to really soak into this wood for the first coat. So that's what we're gonna be doing here.
Noite cai e continua. Luzes começam a surgir. Rumo ao infinito. No samba eu vou fluir.
All right, got a coat of varnish on here. Didn't go without challenge. I don't know if you could see that in the camera, but as I was preparing it and mixing it, I had this board here all wrapped up in cellophane just to use as a flat surface because there's nothing flat in a boat, just to have something to mix on, and immediately knocked over the cup and spilt varnish all over, and luckily Mary ran up here quickly and helped me clean that up. I got 2 coats on here right now. I'm gonna get this nice and hard. These are just from hatches I'm redoing inside the boat where they're always rubbing, so I put new edges on them, new teak strips on here are edging. I don't know why this teak here got stained a light color. I put a lot of thinner in it, and as I was brushing it, it was still skinning over. I had to brush very, very fast. Oh my gosh, there's a ray in the water right there. Hey Mary, there's a ray in the water. A ray. Right there. Can you see it? That light thing in the water? That's a stingray. I didn't know we had rays here. Oh, there he goes! Oh, I just caught that on camera. This varnish that we're using, hopefully if you're doing the same project, you have more choices. But even with using this 333 brushing liquid, it's supposed to slow it down so you can brush. I'm doubling it, like almost 100% thinner, trying to get this stuff so that it doesn't dry too fast. It's still like gumming up as I'm brushing it. So luckily, being a flat coat, you're not gonna see if there's any spots, I don't think. Like already this looks great, and it did not feel like it was going on very well. You can see one heavy spot right there. I can easily sand that out. It's not blending in my spots from the old varnish that I didn't get off, and I'm not sure why I'm getting the odd white spot like this, but I'm gonna hope it probably has something to do with using way too much thinner in it. But I can't use any less thinner. I almost want to put more thinner because it's really hard to brush this. This stuff would be amazing in a spray bomb because it would just, you'd spray it and it would dry instantly. So we're gonna leave this. We're gonna let this get nice and hard so that it doesn't mark it when I flip it. I'm gonna do the other side just to seal it up. Get a whole whack of coats on there to protect it. Okay, it's the next day now. I put tons of coats on this yesterday. I didn't want to film a ton of that because it's literally just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. This stuff has a really interesting finish. Like, it looks like wood that I just put a light coat of stain on. You don't see any of the varnish, but there's got to be 8 coats on that already. On the edge here, looking a little drippy. That side I couldn't see as I was doing the varnish. And this is where the hinge is going to be, and it's up against here anyways. Nobody's gonna see it, but I'm still gonna sand the whole thing really lightly, put a final coat over top of this, and then we can move on to the next stage.
No time to stop and think. Grooving through the hustle on the edge of the brink. That hurricane season, baby, gone in a blink. We work hard.
Alright, this is now going to be my final coat. I sanded down little high spots, give it a nice flat surface here for the final coat. There's a little dripping that happened over here, but that's literally underneath the hinge. I'm not at all worried about that. In fact, I'll just take this rough sandpaper and scratch that off. Wiped down, sanded, wiped down, and prepared. I got a new brush for today, and what I'm doing, I'm doing the bottom first because Once it's dry, I want to flip it over, make sure there's no drips on the other side, and do the final coat. You always do the final coat on the most visible side. So I'm gonna start with the bottom, that way I can flip it over, I can catch any drips, and then I can do a final coat on the top, and if there's any drips at that point, they will be on the bottom, but hopefully there won't be any.
Keep it chill, rhythm tight, no need to stress. Gonna ride this storm, oh yes, oh yes.
So I discovered when installing the hinges, I could just feel the wood move a little bit on the other side, the finish side, and I don't want to break through the finish. These screws, I don't need the tips on these screws, so I'm just gonna go ahead and grind them off. I've ground down the tips off of these screws. I don't have the fear of them poking the other side now. The part that grabs is not the very tip anyways. The tip is kind of pierced through the wood, but these holes are already drilled and threaded. Unnecessary to have that tip. So what I'm doing here, this is what I cleaned the brush with. So it's got a lot of thinner in there and a little bit of varnish. Gonna put a little bit of that in these holes as I'm going along. I think that's gonna just help to rust proof these screws a little bit and harden up the wood around the screw. These are not 3/16 stainless steel. I can't get that here. They're 308. It's gonna be used in the cockpit. It should be okay, but I still have to keep an eye on the fact that they are not 3/16s and they could rust. Alright, table is varnished. It's still very fragile. It's going to be kind of fragile for days to weeks to even months. You know, varnish gets harder and harder over time. So I'm going to be very delicate with that for a while.
Anchor down, got the storm on the way. Ooh yeah, sweat and beads on the brow, ain't no time to play. Gotta batten down the hatch, keep the sails at bay. Funk fusion in the air, feel that rhythm sway. Waves rolling high, but our spirits never.
So in conclusion, had some issues while building this for myself. Not having my own table saw in the beginning really was a setback, relying on somebody to cut this in half for me. I don't know if I mentioned all that, but they literally cut the wrong board in half, and it went back to him 4 times before he made the one simple cut. We got past that and got this all put together. Regarding the hinges, I had to round those off a whole lot more than I wanted to. I was really wanting that to be a fairly crisp edge so that when you shut this, there's, you know, just a small seam here. But the edges were rubbing together when I opened and closed it. So when I had this all done and I opened it once, the two surfaces rubbed together and it wrecked the varnish. Because varnish takes like days or weeks or even months to continue to get harder and harder. So when that varnish only being on there for a day, it completely wrecked that, and I had to end up sanding everything down and redoing a final coat on everything and an additional 6 coats on the seam because I had to take that right down to wood. So if you build this, you're gonna realize you gotta make where these join here, gotta round those over a lot more than you probably want to avoid them rubbing on each other, which now you can see they don't. It's pretty functional. It closes. I still have that little bit of a warp here. This will correct over time. When I go away, I'm just going to stick a clamp on there and that'll help untwist it. But this side here sits perfectly flush and this one just has that little gap there. But I can fix that in the future. Now when we're at sea, we still have something to kind of hold on to. When we eat here, our food's not going to fall over because the boat, you know, could be leaning up to like 30 degrees or so. Prevents things from falling off the edge. And then when we're at anchor and we want to eat here, we can comfortably eat now with food right in front of us. Not sitting on the edge of our table like we had to before, leaning over top of it. So, happy with the results. This is as far as this job takes me. I hope some of you are either entertained or this was helpful for you installing double pin hinges. This is how I did them myself. You might have another way. If you do have another way, please share. I'd like to see your experiences. If not, I hope you enjoyed watching this, and we'll see you next week. Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm so our videos get seen. As you can already see, not a lot of people see our videos, and clicking that like button really helps the word to get out. See you next week. Hit that like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. That helps remind you every week when our video comes out, which is almost always, or has been always, on a Sunday morning. So get that cup of joe and watch it when it's fresh. See you next week.